The thing about living in an apartment or renting a room is you have to deal with other people. Depending on how the building is laid out, it's almost like living with strangers. If your next door neighbor accidentally starts a fire, your home could burn too. If the person above you has a flood, it's very likely that you'll be dealing with that problem as well. Not to mention, what if your neighbors in this same building are jerks? Or they have 20 drunk people at their place for a party? Or they practice their drums at 3 a.m.? These are all things to consider, and you might not even be able to research all of this before moving in. My guest today is Tiffany. She was in a different country, and she rented a room to live in. There were other rooms and other people living in those rooms, and they were mostly nice. But there was one guy who was not so nice. And he was pretending to be the landlord. Real people in unreal situations.
The eerie silence when I walked in, and he's just staring at me.
I was like, hello, like, are you okay? And then I had to tell him it was me.
There was just blood everywhere.
They're shouting, they're screaming, they're being hit by bullets, they're hitting the ground.
And in that moment, I literally thought, this is how I die.
Everything changed then.
And I just thought to myself, this isn't happening.
Every single story deserves to be heard.
I'm Scott Johnson, and this is What Was That Like? You're American, and you're in your mid-20s back then, and you decide to move to Rome, Italy, and not just visit, but actually move there. Why do that?
Well, it was honestly a lifelong dream of mine to move to Italy and to live in Italy. Ever since I was a little girl, even before I ever visited Italy, I had this calling, I had this desire. I was just fascinated by Italian culture, the language, everything. I had some Italian blood, not a lot, but I had just enough to sort of use that as an excuse that, you know, my ancestral home was calling to me. And I also studied opera as a undergraduate and a graduate student. Of course, opera is, you know, deeply connected to Italy. Italy is where opera was born. So that just fueled my passion for Italy even more so. And I knew that one day I would live there. It was kind of something that was deep inside of me. I knew that eventually it was just a matter of time. And so when I got to a point in my life in which I didn't really have a career going on, I didn't have a good job, and I had broken up with a boyfriend, I didn't have my own place, I had been living with my boyfriend. And so I was kind of all of a sudden completely untethered. I had nothing. I was done with school. Nothing was holding me to the States. And I said, this is the moment. If I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. And so I did it.
So you just moved there. What was your plan? Did you know anyone there?
I knew a few people, but I didn't really have friends there. What I had was some relatives of my grandmother, some distant relatives, like third cousins. They were not close family members, but I did already know them because I had gone to visit. I had spent considerable amount of time in Italy before I moved there, particularly in the summers. And so I had met and stayed with these Italian relatives. So I had a little foothold. I had someone I could stay with while I was looking for an apartment. And they lived in Rome. They lived just outside of the city. You know, I asked them if I could, and they were happy to have me. Unfortunately, and this is another story that we're not going to go into, that relationship that kind of soured my relationship with them. So I'm not in contact with them anymore, but I do have to thank them for putting me up for a couple of weeks, though, when I first moved to Rome. As far as a plan, I had no plan. Not only did I have no plan, I did not have the legal right to move to Italy. I was an illegal immigrant when I moved to Italy. I had no papers. I did not have Italian citizenship through my family because it was too far back. I was not able to get Italian citizenship. I tried. I looked into it. I really thought when I first moved there that was how I was going to become legal, but it didn't work out for me. So it's not so easy today, 20 years later, to just move to Italy as an American and live there under the radar. It was something that a lot of people did 20 years ago, but today it's not as easy.
How long can you stay before you're considered illegally there?
You can stay 3 months with a tourist visa, which you don't actually have to get a physical visa. It's sort of implied that you can stay for 3 months as an American. It depends on the country you're coming from.
Did you have any ideas for a job? What did you want to do there?
I still had the hope at that time that I might eventually have an opera career. But as far as a practical job that I could do while I was finding my way living there, I was and still am technically a certified yoga instructor. And so I thought, well, that's something that, I could probably find a place to work doing that. And I eventually did do that. And I thought, well, I can always teach English. That's kind of what many, many expats from, English speaking countries fall back on. They say, well, I'm a native English speaker, so there's always demand for English lessons.
You also needed a place to live. How did you go about searching for that?
It was so hard because it wasn't like today where there was no social media 20 years ago. And I think that Facebook came into being in 2007. So this was 2004 when I moved. And there was no social media. There was Craigslist, but Craigslist was not good for long-term rentals. It was really just sort of short-term things. So what you would do in Italy, in Rome particularly, if you needed an apartment, was there's a newspaper. It's basically just classified ads. You buy it it's called Podchaser, and now it exists online. At that time, you just had to buy the paper and you just go through the classified ads looking for apartments. And it's very challenging if you A, don't know the neighborhoods that well, and B, don't speak the language that well. I did speak Italian when I moved here. I already spoke the language proficiently, so I was already a step ahead of many people when they move abroad, but it was still a big challenge to try to understand the abbreviated ads. But that was how I went about it. I did find a place to live. I found a couple of places to live those first few months because they didn't really work out. I think I had 3 apartments in 3 months.
Oh man, okay. You were looking for a specific neighborhood, and I know I'm going to say this wrong, but is it Trastevere?
That's exactly right. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. Why were you going there? Or why did you want to go there?
Well, Trastevere is a very quaint and charming neighborhood in Rome. It's across the river from the main attractions of the city. So it's very central. It's definitely central Rome, but it's being on the other side of the river. It's kind of like lends it a bohemian air. Like think of the left bank in Paris. It's just, a little bit more working class, or it was at one time, a little bit more artsy, a little tiny bit less touristy. And it's very popular with foreign residents because it has that quaint aspect. It's very medieval. It didn't get built up in the Baroque period in the 1700s as much as the rest of the city because it was a more working class neighborhood. And so therefore it's much more medieval now. The buildings are they're much older. And so when you wander around the neighborhood, it's kind of gives you the feeling of being in a small Italian town, even though you're in a capital city, if that makes sense. So a lot of foreigners like it because it answers their idea of what Italy should be. It's a little bit maybe stereotypical, but it's quaint and it's charming, and that's why people love it. What I was looking for, because of budget reasons, of course, was I was looking for a flat share. I wasn't looking to rent my own apartment. Also because I didn't know how long I was going to be there, and I didn't have I didn't have a job yet, so I couldn't just go and rent an apartment. So I was looking to rent a room in someone else's apartment. And I finally found what I thought was just the most amazing apartment, which was, I believe it was a 5-bedroom apartment. So there was the quote unquote landlord who he said that he owned the apartment. Come to find out, he was just renting that apartment, but he said he owned it, and he was subletting the other rooms out to expats, and it was very centrally located. It was a very modern, convenient apartment, so it was very popular. And so, yeah, I remember there was an American guy living there, and a German girl, and a few other people.
And the landlord's name?
Stefano.
Can you just describe him? Because he's kind of the subject of our story today.
So he was in his early 40s. He was short and a little chunky. He was balding, but he had a very disarming manner. He kind of seemed like the guy next door, just like your every man, the Italian version of, like, just kind of a harmless, nice guy, not somebody who's going to be hitting on you, not somebody who's going to be just kind of a harmless guy, just harmless middle-aged man. He was a little bumbling. He was a little bit nerdy, not excessively nerdy, but like he tended that way, like somebody really into like technology and stuff, but generally harmless, innocuous is how he seemed.
So you had sort of a good impression from him about him when you first met.
I had a great impression of him. I thought he was kind of funny. Like, he had a decent sense of humor. Like, he's not the type of person who's going to make you collapse laughing, but he was charming is too strong of a word. I wouldn't call him charming, but he definitely was friendly, and it really could put you at ease. I had found 2 previous apartments before moving in there. They were both like just neurotic Italian women who were just really like, like, oh, don't use that plate, and don't do this, and don't drip water on the floor, and they were so impossible to live with. So I met this man who just seemed so easygoing, and so, just, okay, sure, you don't want, the rent's $500, but I'll give it to you for $450. Sure, you're a nice girl. It just seemed like, oh my gosh, what a change. And the people who were living there, they all seemed so friendly, and yeah, I was so excited to move in. He said, I'm having a little bit of a cash flow problem right now. Would you pay me 4 months rent in advance, obviously in addition to a security deposit? I'll give you the next 2 months free. I'll tack on 2 months for free, because right now I don't have a lot of cash, and I need some cash. And I remember mentioning this to my dad, and my dad said, I don't think that sounds like a good idea. I don't think you should do that. And I didn't listen to my dad. And I had so little money at the time, and I don't remember if by that point I had a job, or, maybe I did, but it was not, it was just maybe a couple hours a week or something. I wasn't bringing in really any money. And so I thought, well, if I do this, then I'm set for 6 months. I don't have to worry about paying rent for 6 months. So I did it.
What was your first indication that there might be something not quite right with Stefano?
It took a while, I'll be honest. Like there was definitely a honeymoon period where I was pretty happy, and I probably was very naive. I look back and I think there was some kind of network in the house, like internet network, and like, of course, things have changed now. So now I'm thinking, okay, if it were today, he would have just given me the Wi-Fi code, but this is 20 years ago. So the technology was different then, and he took my computer and was like, I'll set you up. I'll get you hooked up to the Ethernet or whatever it was. And I should have been a little more wary of something like that, because he put something in my computer, or he got some kind of access to my computer, which of course I didn't discover for a long time. It took a couple of months, and it wasn't until I started to become really good friends with a couple of people in the apartment. And he seemed to always want to be involved in our, going out or having a glass of wine at home. These were people who were my age. We were in our 20s. He was nearly 2 decades older. Not that it matters. I'm happy to spend time with people of all ages, but it just did seem kind of weird. I did, but I feel like I ignored If there were any signs, I was probably ignoring them. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to be comfortable. So I thought, well, everything's okay. It wasn't really until my mom came to visit that things started to really come out.
And your mom actually was able to live in the same building, right? The same apartment?
Yes. So it happened that she decided to come for an entire month. The month of April it was. And it happened to be that one of the rooms was vacant. People were moving in and out very frequently. It was, because we were all expats, some people only live in Rome for, they come for an experience. They stay for 6 months, or they're students or what have you. And so there was an empty room. And I said, well, you should rent this room. And then you can just, you don't have to get a hotel or anything. You can just stay here.
Yeah. And you're at the same place. That's super convenient. Yeah.
We're at the same place. It was super convenient. The kind of weird thing was that the layout of the apartment was such that this bedroom was actually technically an antechamber. It was a room that leads into another room. There was no hallway between this room and Stefano's room. And so to get to his bedroom, he had to walk through the bedroom where my mom was staying, which, looking back, I'm like, I can't even believe my mom was okay with that.
Right. That sounds super creepy.
Yeah. I think at one point I might have said, do you want to switch rooms with me? I'll sleep in that room if you want, and you can sleep in my room. And she said, no, it's okay. My mom is surprisingly laid back about some things. And so she was okay with it. And, this guy, he didn't do anything overt at the beginning. So, you couldn't put your hand on anything. You couldn't put your finger on anything. I'm sure that he knocked on the door. I'm sure he wasn't walking in on her, because that would have been outrageous, right?
That's a deal breaker right there. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so he knew how to walk the line. He knew how to stay on the right side of respectability. And I think this is what, which seduced me into overlooking what was starting to slowly happen and what eventually happened. This is the kind of thing that he would do, and it started to become more and more frequent, or at least I started to notice it from that time, which he would say something that would just kind of psychologically upset you. And he said to my mom, "Oh, last night I was going into my room and you were talking in your sleep, and you were talking about me." And that kind of thing it's just odd enough that it makes you feel weird. It kind of gives you this creepy feeling in your stomach. And she just said, I don't think that's true. My husband's never told me that I talk in my sleep. I've never known my mom to talk in her sleep. And even if you do, would you really stop and listen if you heard someone talking in their sleep? It's just weird. So those were the kind of things. I started to realize more and more from that time that he was trying to, for lack of a better word, psych me out. He was trying to get under my skin in some psychological way. He had a knack for it. He knew just what to say. So you couldn't say, "Oh, how can you say that? How can you do that? You're being completely unreasonable." Or, you couldn't really say anything. But nevertheless, he would manage to get under your skin or get in your brain, like a little brain worm. And so my mom and I went to Umbria for a long weekend, and he kept texting me, and I can't remember now what he was saying, but it was weird stuff. It was like, "Oh, okay, I don't know if you've ever been in this situation where maybe you've told a lie, and the person that you've told a lie to is trying to psych you out and trying to make you feel like you don't know whether they know or not. Maybe you've done something wrong and you don't, you've done something wrong, but this other person, the second person is not coming out right and saying, listen, you did this thing and I'm not okay with it. They're insinuating it without letting you know whether they actually know or not, so that you are left.
Mind games.
Mind games. That's exactly the phrase I was looking for. Playing mind games with you. So he was writing me these text messages, and to this day, I can't remember what it was about, but clearly he was trying to play mind games with me from, 200 kilometers away. And my mom was like, I needed her to point it out to me for whatever reason. I was just ignoring it, or I was blind to it. And she was like, this guy is weird. Like, he's messing with you. What is this? What is this he's saying? And then she brought up the thing he had said about her talking in her sleep. And so when she sort of clued me in, then my senses were turned on and I started paying attention. I really wasn't paying attention until that time.
Tell me about the break-in. What happened then?
Okay, so I had moved to, as I mentioned, to Italy, partially in the hopes of maybe having an opera career. And at that time, my first year in Rome, I was still actively practicing and studying opera. But I couldn't really practice in that apartment because there were too many people living there. And so Stefano had, out of the kindness of his heart, I thought, at the time, found this place where I could go and sing. It was this place all the way across town that was sort of an abandoned building that some actors had taken over, and they were sort of occupying it and doing their shows there or rehearsing. And he said, you can go there, and I've talked to them, and you can practice in one of the rooms and they don't care. And so I was doing this, and it got me out of the house for, a certain number of hours every day, in addition to my job. Whether he did that on purpose to try to get me out of the house, or whether he was actually being, helpful, I don't know. All I know is one day I was going out to practice and I was leaving the house, and there was a tram stop right in front of the apartment. It was on a busy street. And I was waiting at the tram stop, and I saw him come out of the apartment. And he almost never left, which is something that I also didn't pick up on right away. He was always there. He didn't seem to have any kind of social life, and he didn't seem to work outside the home, which was not that common back then to work from home. And I saw him leave the apartment, and he saw me, and he saw that I saw him. And there was something slightly off about him at that moment, like he was nervous about something. But I couldn't put my finger on anything specific. I thought about it afterwards. I thought he looked nervous. He looked kind of odd, like something was up with him. But I didn't think anything about it at the time. And I came back, and keep in mind, at least five people are living in this apartment. So there's almost always somebody at home. Usually it's him. Usually it's multiple people. So it's very rare that nobody was at home. And so I came back a couple of hours later, and he said, "Oh, Tiffany, there's been a break-in. You should probably go check your room and make sure that nothing has been taken." Because, I haven't had anything taken, but Steve had some coins on his desk, and they were taken. And I was like, how could there have been a break-in? Like, it was the middle of the day, first of all. And he said, well, I didn't bolt the door. So, it's very easy to get into an apartment that's just has the latch without being bolted.
So he was saying there was a break-in, but you had just left. You were just leaving.
Well, I'd been gone a couple of hours. I'd been gone maybe 2 hours. But the thing is, the thing is like that it would have happened when nobody happened to be home. Like this apartment where there's always somebody home, that it would have happened, right at that moment. And he's Italian. That an Italian would leave their apartment without bolting the door is in the city of Rome is beyond belief, because their break-ins are a problem in Italy, and they are a problem in Rome, but people don't leave their apartments unbolted for this very reason. So that in itself is suspect. So I go into my bedroom, and I had a little jewelry box on my shelf, and it was open on the floor, and some stuff had spilled out of it. And I went through it, and pretty much everything was gone. Only the jewelry that I was wearing, remained. And it was all genuine jewelry. Nothing was ridiculously expensive, but it was all real gold, real jewels. And so for me, it was a huge, huge loss, also on a sentimental level, because mostly they were gifts from my parents. And so that was really just heartbreaking for me. I don't think that I had any cash taken, but I did have one of my dresses was taken, like a long, sparkly black evening gown was taken. And the German girl who lived there, her favorite jacket was taken, her favorite jacket, and nothing else. So I had a laptop computer in my room. I had a digital camera. I had probably a very, very old MP3 player, but valuable at that time. None of that was taken. Every person in the apartment had a laptop, and Stefano had a whole computer system. He was a tech guy. So he had probably a couple of computers. He probably had a stereo system. We had tons of tech in that house. It's beyond belief that none of that would have been taken, that they would have just taken some jewelry and clothing. It just doesn't make any sense. But it was almost the way that he behaved afterwards that was like, okay, well, I'm going to call the police and have them come over and file a report. And he did. And he called the police and they came. And while the policeman was there, he was asking me questions and he said, well, can I see your permesso di soggiorno, which is basically a foreigner's official document to be able to live in a country for either a temporary or a permanent amount of time. And I, of course, didn't have one. And I said, I don't have one. I'm just staying on a tourist visa right now. And he kind of looked at me like, you're not supposed to do that. But he didn't care. And I have to be honest, the main reason that very few people cared at that time was because I come from a privileged country, a first world country. If I had been from a different country, I would have had there would have been a completely different reaction. So I'm completely aware of that. I don't think that they're as lax today as they were back then, but part of me, and again, I don't want to be too paranoid here, but part of me thinks that Stefano called the police on purpose, hoping that would come out, that would come up to remind me that I don't have legal standing in the country.
And it would make sense from his standpoint financially. He's already got rent in advance and he could rent your room again after you get booted out of the country.
Exactly. Now, I don't know that he wanted to get me deported. Although I wouldn't put it past him. I always give people the benefit of the doubt, even after they do horrible things to me. So maybe he did. But the truth is, he maybe didn't know the law, but I discovered later that if you rent out a room knowingly to someone who is living in the country illegally, you're in much more trouble than the illegal person as the landlord, if you knowingly rent to them. So he could have actually been in big trouble as well. A couple of other things happened that were very unpleasant. We started to, animosity started to come out in the open. I started to feel like I didn't really want to be there anymore, but I was putting up with it because I had prepaid. I got a email from an ex-boyfriend, my ex-boyfriend who was living in the States, who I was still friendly with. And he said that he had been emailed a video of me in an intimate situation. I remember coming home from work with cash on me, going into my bedroom, turning out all the lights, and hiding the money in the dark. Because I was afraid that there might have been a camera in the room somehow or some way that he was able to see where I might hide my cash. So I definitely, at that point, by June, I had some really bad feelings. One evening, I had some friends over and we were talking loudly in the bedroom and we were laughing and we were having wine and he was texting me and he would never just say, "Oh, can you please be quiet?" He would say things like, "Oh, if you're going to talk so loud, at least invite me in," or things like this. I mumbled something under my breath, what I thought was under my breath, to these people about how he was starting to get really unpleasant. And he texted me again, not saying, "I heard you say this," but in a way that it's ambiguous. Did he hear what I said? Did he not hear what I said? He just had this gift of messing with you. And, I think, did he hear what I said? He must have heard, but how could he hear? Yes, his room was right on the other side of mine, but the walls aren't that thin, surely. So that was another reason I thought maybe the room was bugged.
Now you're starting to think that you want to move out, but financially, it doesn't really make sense.
I mean, it would have been at a loss. I mean, I think by the time I was deciding I wanted to move out, I had at least used those 4 months. I wanted to have the other 2 free months because I felt like I earned them since I had done my part of the bargain, paying in advance. But it wasn't as bad as if, only a month had gone by. I had used up those 4 months that I had paid for. I was actually out with a girlfriend and 2 of her guy friends who were Italian. And I was telling them this story. And my way is I'm kind of a flippant person. I'll tell maybe a serious story in a flippant way. And they kind of were like, you're kind of making light of this, but this sounds bad. This guy sounds like bad news. And I was like, yeah, he's really unpleasant or this or that. And they said, well, why don't we come over to your apartment and have a cup of tea at your apartment with you and just see what he does, what he says.
Oh, so they wanted to meet him.
They kind of wanted to meet him or be there, just make their presence known. I mean, these are Italian guys. So it's like they're on their home turf. You know what I mean? They're not foreigners. There's definitely a power imbalance, in a country, in any country, between the people who are native there and the people who are just visitors or immigrants or expats. And so they wanted to kind of be like, okay, we want to show this guy that you have friends, that you're not completely isolated and completely alone. And so they came over, and the funny thing was he shut himself in his bedroom the entire time. He would not come out because the guy was a coward. He was a total coward, and he picked on women who were isolated, who didn't have, any connections, any friends, any relatives, and who were foreigners. So he did not come out of his room. But while we were sitting there having a cup of tea, one of them noticed there was this, it was actually like a little chalkboard. And there was this, it was something had been written on. It was like the kind of chalkboard you would write your grocery list on. And something was written there. And I didn't understand it because it was written in Roman dialect. It said something like, vie qua e ti do una pizza in faccia. Come over here so I can punch you in the face. It was something like that. They said, this is bad. Like, this guy there's something wrong with this guy that he would even write this, knowing that you wouldn't even understand it. It's weird. It's off. And it was really that night that I decided in my head to leave. That wasn't the night that I left, but that was the night that I said, that's it. I'm not staying anymore. I don't want to do this anymore.
What was the incident with the knife in the kitchen?
That was the next day. I kind of felt like after that night, after talking to those guys, after kind of getting a wake-up call, I should take the gloves off and stop pretending like everything was okay and just, going about my business. And I was in the kitchen. I was making something to eat. And he was also being much, much more, his whole attitude, it changed. The shift was so slow from this friendly, bumbling, harmless guy to was psycho, which is really what he was. It was hard to even notice the change. But by that point, he had taken the gloves off as well. And he said, why are you always here? You're always here. Don't you have a life? Why don't you have a life? Don't you have anything to do? Your life is so sad. Something like that. And I said, I have every right to be here. I pay rent. I can spend as much time here as I want. And I have friends. And I really think it was the day after these guys had been there because I was thinking about them, and I was thinking about there was also a guy that I had started dating, and I said, I have friends, and you can't intimidate me. I'm not completely alone. I said something like that. There was a little, that little IKEA metal thing that you put your clean forks and knives in after you've washed them on the edge of your sink. There was one of those, and there was a knife in it, just a regular steak knife, and he just pulled it out. And he held it up to me. He didn't touch me with it, but he held it up in front of my face. And he said, no, you don't have any power here. I have the power here. I hold the knife here, not you. That was probably our last interaction, at least in person. I had a friend come over while I was packing, keep me company for part of the time anyway. The girlfriend who had, let me her 2 guy friends who'd come over the night before, she had an extra room in her apartment.
And she was one of your English students, is that right?
She was one of my yoga students. I did end up teaching yoga, and she found me. She found, one of my ads that was hanging up somewhere in the city. And I would go to her apartment and teach her yoga. And she had an extra room, and she said, Tiffany, you got to get out of this situation. Come stay with me. If you need to stay with me, you can come and stay with me. Thank God, because, I didn't really have anywhere else to go. The few friends that I had in town, none of them really had the space to put somebody up for the time it takes to find a new apartment. And so I was really lucky, and I must have sent her a text and said, can I come over tonight? And she said yes. And I packed up all my stuff, and luckily it wasn't that much stuff.
Just from your description of it, it seems like it would be kind of a traumatic thing. Were you scared, or what was your emotion at that moment when you're packing up thinking, I got to get out of here?
I was running to the bathroom. That's how bad it was. I was physically sick to my stomach. I was very nervous. I was just as nervous as you would imagine being in a situation like that. Like, the guy wasn't really the type. I still believe that he's not the type to physically assault somebody. I could be wrong, but he's more the psychological attack, the mind games. I didn't think like he's going to come into my room and he's going to hit me with a baseball bat, or he's going to stab me with that knife, or he's going to jump on me. I really didn't have that fear, but I still was afraid because he had so psychologically messed with me, and I felt so unwelcome there. I just had to get out. I packed up my stuff. He didn't come out of his room. I didn't say goodbye. I just left I think I took the keys, actually. I still have the keys. Actually, I still have the keys to his apartment. I'm sure they've been changed since then. But I left, and I went down to the curb where there's a taxi stand. I was sitting on this bench waiting for the taxi, and I just had that feeling that you get, that prickly feeling on the back of your neck when you know somebody's watching you. I believe the apartment was on the 4th floor. And I looked up, and it was not his bedroom. His bedroom was on the other side of the building. He'd gone into one of the other bedrooms to look down at me and to see what I was doing. He hadn't left his room while I was packing. And so I guess he wanted confirmation of, he probably saw, heard the door slam, saw my room was empty and wanted to see. And I looked up and I just gave him the finger. I know it's so immature, but I just gave him the finger and he just gave it right back. And that was that. And a cab eventually showed up and I got out of there.
So you had a temporary place to stay, but then things kind of turned around, right? You got a decent job. You had a place to stay with this nice Scottish woman. And so it seems like things were looking up, right?
Yeah, things definitely changed for the better after that. I started working in tourism. I really enjoyed that. And working in tourism brought me into contact with a whole bunch of new friends. And I just met so many people. The first year that I lived in Rome, I was very isolating. I had very few friends. I was very, very lonely. And so working in tourism, not only I was finally making decent money, but I was also making a bunch of friends, and I found an apartment after moving out of that temporary situation with the girl I taught yoga to. Like you said, I met a Scottish woman. I moved into her apartment, rented a room in her apartment, and she was great. She was fun. I ended up having a really wonderful summer, which was, since I moved to Rome in September, that was really my first summer living there, and I have very, very fond memories of that summer. But Stefano was not completely gone.
Because you texted him, right? Is that?
Yes. I don't know if I texted him or emailed him. Probably texted him. But I basically said, after I'd been out for, I don't know how long, a week, a couple weeks, a month, I'm not sure. I had, so my confidence was sort of built back up. I wasn't as scared. And I said, this guy owes me money. First of all, he owes me for the security deposit.
At the very least, yeah.
Yeah. Secondly, he owes me for those 2 months' rent. And so I wrote to him, and I don't know what words I said, but I basically said that, you owe me this much money. He said something like, well, I've gone through the damages to your room, which there were no damages. I've gone through the damages to your room, and it turns out we're even with all the damages. I don't know. You don't know me. I don't know you anything. Isn't that nice? Now we don't have to worry about anything. And I must have written back something like, no, that's not possible. And that's when he started threatening me. The worst stuff that he did to me was after I moved out. He basically revealed that, or at least he claimed, that he had photos or photocopies of my private diaries, which I had kept copious diaries when I was living there, partially because I was not going out very much. I was not doing a lot. I didn't have a lot of friends, and so I was writing a lot in my journal. And he said that he, had all of these and that he was going to start emailing them to my close friends, family, ex-boyfriends, etc. And to prove that he was able to, he sent an email to a group of people, it was a very random group, definitely 2 ex-boyfriends, a guy I was dating at the time, and a couple of friends, and my mom.
How did he have all those email addresses?
He had access to my email somehow because the email came from me.
Oh, so he was using your email account to contact these
Yeah,
they were in your contacts list probably.
Exactly. He emailed me from his email address, but he reached out to, again, it was a group of maybe like 8 or 10 people, and it said that it was coming from me. Like in the from spot, it was coming from, but it wasn't like he had actually logged into my email account because there was no sent messages. I'm not seeing any sent messages. He was able somehow, using his technological skills, to make it appear that this email was coming from me.
Mm-hmm. It's easy to spoof an email account. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what he must have done, and he must have somehow had access to my emails because he had these addresses. He wrote to them. He wrote to them saying, "I've started a blog," and he sent them a link to this blog. And this blog had my face on it, and it didn't have my name, but it had a name that I liked to use as sort of like a second name, let's say like a stage name. And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to be updating this blog, so he'll keep an eye on it." And then he wrote to me privately saying, "I'm sure you wouldn't want the people at your sister's wedding," because my sister was engaged and she was getting married that summer. "I'm sure you wouldn't want the guests at your sister's wedding to know what a porn diva you are," referring apparently to things I had written in my diary. "I'm sure you wouldn't want Enzo, who was the guy that I was dating, who I was writing about. I'm sure you wouldn't want him to read all these private thoughts. I'm sure you wouldn't want your mother to see this and that." And I mean, to me, that was the scariest thing of all. That was much scarier than the idea of losing money. It was even more scarier than someone holding up a knife to me who I didn't believe would use it, because, the thought that such private thoughts and experiences would be plastered up on the internet and people in your life would read them. I mean, it was horrifying, absolutely horrifying to me. There were probably only 5 or 6 emails in total. It felt like a lot more. I felt like I was being stalked, to be honest. But at the end of the day, I just stopped responding. And as far as I know, nothing ever came of it, as far as I know. The only thing that he may have done is send some kind of video to my ex-boyfriend, which I don't even know if I believe, just because not to go in too much detail, but I feel like I wasn't involved in anything at home. I was, if anything, I was, whatever I was getting up to that might be an intimate situation was not happening there. So I don't necessarily know that is true, or if it was just, insinuated to my ex that was what it was. He says he never opened it. He never looked at it. So the video may not have existed. I guess I'll never know.
Here's what this just can't happen to come into my mind. He sent emails to people that pretending to be you. Mm-hmm. Could he have not sent an email to you pretending to be your ex-boyfriend?
That's a very good question. I don't know how. Yeah, that thought has never crossed my mind. I might have to reach out to him and ask.
That would be interesting to see if this ex-boyfriend remembers any of this, because he may not even been involved at all.
Yeah, now you've really got me thinking. I don't know, because it would definitely have been emailing, because at that time it was very, very expensive to text somebody in a foreign country.
Oh, right. You pay per text back
yes,
then. Yeah.
It would have been very, very expensive. So I wouldn't have been texting him. I would have only been emailing him. So it is possible. It is possible.
Okay, a few months go by, and you're kind of starting to feel safe again.
Mm.
And you're traveling. What happened then?
His tactic of threatening me with these diary entries and this blog worked, because I stopped responding to him. And which is probably what he wanted, because he didn't want to have to give me any money. And time went by, and you forget things and you move on. And so I was definitely feeling okay. I had a comfortable place to live, and I went back to the States for my sister's wedding, and that was in Seattle. But she was going to have her bachelorette party in Las Vegas. I was so excited that I was able to go, because just 3-6 months before, I just wouldn't have had the money to be able to go. And I was able to, and I was just so excited. And I'd never been to Las Vegas, and it just seems like such a fun thing. And so, of course, I bought my flight round trip from Seattle and staying at the hotel with them. My sister and her friends, they all lived in LA. So they were all flying up from LA. I was the only one flying down from Seattle. So I was at the airport by myself. I went to check in, as you do, and they typed in the name, number, whatever, and they said, this reservation has been canceled. I thought, what? You mean the flight's been canceled? And they said, no, the reservation has been canceled. You canceled your reservation. And I said, no, I didn't. Why? I didn't. I said, anyways, it's a non-refundable flight. Like, I canceled it for no money. Why would I even do that? And they said, yeah, that's right. That's weird. And it hit me that I had booked that flight from Rome, from my computer, my laptop computer in Rome. Somehow, through the magic of technology, circa 2005, this guy had found a way to access that reservation and to cancel it. I'm sitting there, and the knowledge of this is dawning on me. And I'm like, I'm not going to be able to go, because I can't just buy another ticket, especially last minute. What's it going to cost? I'm thinking, I don't get to go on this trip. I don't get to be there for my sister. I'm her maid of honor. All these thoughts are going through my head. And I'm like, even if I tell these people this story, are they going to believe me? And I am just trying to work out in my own head what had happened. It's just dawning on me. And I started crying and I tried to explain it to them. And I was just lucky. I had an agent who was compassionate and who was not too much of a stickler for the rules. And they said, okay, don't worry, we're going to reinstate the ticket. And they did. And I got to go, and I didn't have to pay anything extra, and everything worked out. But it was ugly. It was like, that's mean. That's really mean. I wouldn't do that to my worst enemy. How do you even think of that?
And obviously, he's the one that did it. I mean, it seems clear anyway.
Well, yeah, it's clear. It's clear. Yeah.
Has he bothered you or contacted you since then?
No, he hasn't. I did see him on the street after I met my husband, but before we were married. So it was probably because I ended up staying in that neighborhood for years. I lived in Trastevere until 2016. So I lived there another 12 years. Part of that time, I lived 2 blocks from that apartment. And in fact, I'm surprised I didn't see him more often, only probably because he hardly ever left. But I did see him once. I was on my husband's arm. Wasn't my husband yet, but, And I think he's a type of person who he's only going to victimize people who he thinks are powerless and unprotected.
Vulnerable, yeah.
Yeah, and vulnerable. So when he saw me that I was, with someone, I mean, it's sad. It's really sad that, this day and age, a woman needs to have a significant other in order to not be harassed. It's sad, but that's unfortunately the way that it is in some cases. He never bothered me after that. And I mean, I don't think I ever heard from him, to be honest, after that summer, after those emails. Obviously there was the trip that he tried to cancel. I never called him on that. I never accused him of that. I just didn't want to go there. I just let it fly. So I don't think that I even heard from him. But then after he saw me with my husband, he probably thought, well, yeah, I'm not going to bother her again.
As we record this, it's been, more than 20 years?
Yeah.
How often do you think about him?
Not often. Luckily not often. Yeah. It's really kind of feels like ancient history now. And in fact, many of the details of this story, I hadn't thought about at all since they happened. But, it's part of my story. It's part of my expat story. I feel like every expat has at least one crazy story, if not more. I mean, I'd like to say I learned from it, but honestly, I still feel like I'm a very trusting person. So I don't even know if I can say I learned from it.
That's okay, though. You don't want to lose that completely, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Just because of this one guy, I think people are generally good, and this guy just wasn't.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. I always hoped that one day, because my husband's father he's retired now, but he was a police officer, pretty high up in the Italian police. And I always thought, oh, one day, like, we've got to get revenge on this guy. Like, you've got to go. And because the truth is the way that he operates is totally illegal, subletting this apartment out to foreigners. And I actually met, now I'm thinking about it, I met people after the fact who were living with him or who had lived with him. And he had done weird stuff with them as well. And I always thought someday we've got to give this guy his comeuppance, but not had the opportunity
so
yet.
You do. It sounds like you do still think about him just a little bit. In that sense, right? You wouldn't be mad if you saw his mugshot.
Oh
somewhere.
God, I'd be thrilled.
What are you doing now? What's your life in Rome like now?
Okay, well, I don't live in Trastevere anymore, unfortunately. Not that I'm not happy where I am, but I do miss that wonderful neighborhood. It's such a vibrant, beautiful place to live. I now live in the outskirts of the city, near my in-laws. It's like a classic Italian thing to live near your in-laws when you have a child. So my husband and I have a 9-year-old son. I am a writer, and I published a book for young readers, like middle grade readers, so 8 to 12, 8 to 13 years old, more or less. I published that back in 2018. That's called Midnight in the Piazza. It's an art mystery set in contemporary Rome. And I have a podcast called The Bittersweet Life, it started out as a podcast about expat life and the expat experience, but it's really evolved over the years to be much more about, just life questions in general, not simply living abroad. And I'm also a tour guide and a trip planner. So people trust me to plan their itineraries to Italy and to Rome. And yeah, that's the gist of it.
I've always been kind of jealous of people who knew from a young age what they wanted to do. And you knew this is where you wanted to live and you wanted to make a life there. And you've done it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, my mom says, when you moved off to Italy, I thought that you'd come back eventually.
Oh boy. Well, we will have links to your website and your podcast and your book. And your primary social media is Instagram. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Good. So we'll have links to all of that. And if any listeners are traveling to Rome, they need to find you to have you show them around the city.
Absolutely.
If you'd like to contact Tiffany, you can do that through her website. And in the episode notes, I'll have links to that and her socials and also some pictures. That's all at whatwasthatlike.com/210. Our Facebook group question this past Tuesday was, what caused you to end a friendship? If something comes to mind, come on over and share it with the rest of us. whatwasthatlike.com/Facebook. And you might already know this, but all of the main episodes of What Was That Like are available fully transcribed, so you can read the whole episode if you want to. They're always at the episode notes page, which is the website, then a / and the episode number. So today's episode transcript is at whatwasthatlike.com/210. You can read it right on that page if you want, or you can download the whole thing as a PDF file. Graphics for this episode were created by Bob Bretz. Full episode transcription was created by James Lai. And now, the listener story. This is a 5 to 10 minute story sent in by a listener. It's how we end every episode. I'd love to play your story for everyone. Just record it on your phone and send it to scott@whatwasthatlike.com. This listener, Julie, gives us a little glimpse into what life is like when you're legally blind. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.
My name is Julie. I lost my vision as an adult. I'm now legally blind. I can see a little bit, but it's like looking through straws. I use a white cane to feel what's in front of me. I want to explain what it can be like when people ignore the fact that I have a white cane, or even worse. I've had people jump over the cane, kick the cane out of the way, push me out of the way, and other things. You need to imagine not being able to see these people until they are right in front of your face. They just appear there, sometimes in midair. It's terrifying. They go on with their day as if nothing's happened, but I can't. I'm left shaking and doubting my ability to get around safely. I lived in France for over a decade. This was very lucky for me because the medical care there is really good, and I got 2 years of really good therapy. This ranged from how to use a white cane to sitting in a circle surrounded by speakers to learn how to decipher the sounds around me. This was unlucky because people in France are a lot more self-centered, which made it very difficult for me as a person with a disability. To be clear, the majority of people in no matter what country are good. They're caring and they have situational awareness. Unfortunately, I can't usually see the good people. When I do see people move out of the way for me, I thank them. That's really important to me. Usually, though, it's when I'm with somebody that they say later, wow, I can't believe how everybody just parted when they saw you coming. And then I feel kind of bad that I wasn't able to thank these people for being so nice to me. If I hear a child ask one of their parents, like, what is that? Or I see them staring at the cane, I'll stop and explain it to them. I'll show them how it works, and I'll even let them try it if they want to. This allows them to start conversations with their friends and family, and hopefully people will understand more what it's like to have a white cane. I've even had parents ask me questions. I really enjoy being able to teach people about that. I try to leave the house at least once a day. I know that I need to get fresh air. I'm a real people person, so I need to see other people. But I also know that at least one person is going to make things really difficult for me. In the grand scheme of things, this isn't a lot of people. But when you see how it affects my day, it makes it really hard for me to force myself to leave the house again the next day. I want to tell you about what happened to me the other day. It's not the worst thing that's happened to me so far, but I'm still having trouble dealing with it. I went to my local department store. It's the only one that I can walk to because I'm obviously not allowed to drive. While I was standing in line to pay and not moving, I felt someone pressing up against me on my right side. I started saying, no, 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 but the woman was persistent. She pushed past me, tripped hard over my cane, broke it in half, and then fell on the floor. I looked at her and I said, "What's wrong with you?" And she screamed at me and said, "I'm just trying to pass." And so I said, is this how you treat disabled people? Is this your first day being a human being? I don't think that I can say what she said to me, but it was basically F you as loud as she could. The store was packed and everyone was just staring. I stood there shaking with my mouth open. I didn't know what to do. If someone had forced themselves onto a person with perfect vision and then poked their eyes out, that would be considered assault. But here I'm told it's just bad luck and bad manners when it happens to someone like me. I was so shaken up that I had a panic attack. Thankfully, 2 very nice ladies came over right away and they helped me. But this is still running through my head now over and over and over. And I'm trying to figure out, what can I do to avoid a situation like this? What could I have done differently? I have no idea how to keep myself safe. I don't know how to handle these situations any differently, and I have no legal recourse. Something similar happened to a blind man in France, and they put the video on the news and tried to help find the guy. Here in Canada, I was told that there's nothing that I can do. So here I am sitting at home wondering, should I go out? Can I go out? And am I going to be safe if I go out again today? And this is what it's like to be legally blind.